Hello and welcome to the Under Center podcast. I am your host, Dara Marr, and I am joined today by two members of the Drew Brees to Come Out of Retirement fan club, Fionn Malloy and Jake Woolhead. Guys, can you not just let the guy retire?
No, he needs to come back and play for another 20 seasons.
He's making Tom Brady look better.
I'm convinced that's why he came back last season. I'm convinced that's why he came back last season. He was going to retire and Tom Brady said, no, I'm playing another year.
That's probably it. That is probably it. We do have actually a packed show this week. We're continuing our off-season series, and we are going to be looking at the Tennessee Titans. And on the show with us this week is Gentry Estes, who is sport columnist for the Tennessean. Gentry, how are you?
Good to be with you guys.
Excellent stuff. We are delighted to have you on to talk a bit of Titans today. But before we get into that, if you are watching the show on YouTube, if you can, could you please like this video and subscribe to the Dynamo Podcast Network? That is where you will get this podcast each and every week on YouTube. Alternatively, if you want to get us on the audio side of things, you can through Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get them. Just search Dynamo Podcast Network. And we'll be there too. And the great thing is, it's not just our podcast. There's so many other ones there too. You have the Four Podman for any wrestling fans out there. You also have Retrotainment for any your retro movie fans out there that want to hear some facts and figures about the old retro movies that you used to love as a kid. So let's get into the show and let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. Gentry, we're going to start a little bit at the 2020 season. And I want to get your overall verdict briefly about the season as a whole under Coach Bravel. Another playoff appearance, division win, but it seems as though there was a little bit left there that you could have went a little further if it wasn't for the loss against the Ravens.
Yeah, really, as you look at the Titans this year, that they go 11-5. So you say, yeah, I mean, it was a good season, but they were pretty lopsided in terms of their offense was outstanding and the defense was terrible. And you never really got the sense that this team was as much of a Super Bowl contender as maybe the year before when they made kind of a surprise run to the AFC Championship game. This last year's team, they just never seemed complete. They would win games based largely off the offense, quarterback and Ryan Tannehill, obviously maybe the best running back in the league, and Derrick Henry. But defensively, it was a challenge. They dealt with a lot of injuries on that side of the ball and just a lot of holes that they didn't really get filled in the offseason and in free agency. And, you just always felt like each week, if they were going to win games, they were just going to have to outscore people. And they were able to do that, which I think is a credit to what they had going on the offensive side of the ball. To me, 11-5, they were a little lucky for me to be able to do that. They won a lot of close games late, drives late in games, sending games to overtime, making plays. They were able to win those close games, and that says something about their team. There was a lot of fight there. They were never out of games. They would always come back. They would always show a lot of grit and determination and all that, but they need a better defense if they're going to take the next step.
Yeah, and speaking of fight, there was a good bit of fight with the team, especially with this new rivalry that they seem to struck up against the Ravens regular season, with obviously all the shenanigans you could say with the on the crest in the middle of the field, and then the Ravens did it back in the playoff game. I think that's something that we're missing in football, is a good rivalry between two teams that just blatantly just don't like each other.
Yeah, that's the case. They definitely have that. And a little bit of history there, that the Ravens being the top seed in 2019 and the Titans go in and beat them. And that was a real kick in the stomach there for the Ravens. They didn't expect that. I was there that night in Baltimore, and you could tell from their fans to the players, nobody expected Tennessee to come in and do that to them. Then they played again last season, got into a little scrap before the game started. Basically the way that works is the Titans, before every game, they would kind of meet up at the middle of the field. It's just something they've always done with Vrabel, where the team would meet up, and you never really thought much of it. But for some reason that day in Baltimore, the Ravens really took exception to the Titans doing that and logo in the middle of the field. and you had John Harbaugh and Malcolm Butler kind of jawing back and forth a little bit, and some more of the Titans players got involved, and you could tell it was pretty contentious, and that game was going to be that way, and it was a physical game, the close game. The Titans made a bunch of plays at the end and won it in overtime. So I think for the Ravens to come to Nashville and win the playoff game was a big deal for Baltimore. They were really up for that and wanted to pay Tennessee back a little bit. And I don't think they're going to play again next year, which is a shame. The NFL should make that happen.
Yeah, it should be. You play your 3 division rivals, and for the Titans and Ravens, you play each other every season. That's a guarantee for sure. It should be. But you talked about the issues on defense last year. It's something that they've looked at, obviously, in free agent this year too. But last year, with the signings, especially of Jadeveon Clowney and Vic Beasley, like, pass rush was something that they wanted to get right. And they seem to really struggle to get at the passer for pressures or even sacks last year. They were 29th, I believe, in sacks last year. And looking at now this offseason, something that they continue to try and fix by making the signing, especially of Bud Dupree on a massive deal. And the fact that he's still recovering from the injury as well. What do you make of the move? Because just as an outsider looking in myself now, I thought, like, obviously the pass rusher, he is a good pass rusher, but I think he was one that fared and benefited a lot from the amount of attention that TJ Watt got in games, so that Bud Dupree was able to probably get a lot more sacks or a lot more QB pressures than maybe he will in Tennessee.
I think that's a good point. And that's come up. The first media availability with Bud, he got asked about that, and he kind of bristled about it a little bit. He kind of stuck up for himself and said, "You'll watch the tape. You look at the plays I'm making. I think he's a confident guy." And I think he was a good addition. The thing about it, those signings last year, Vic Beasley was just a horrific signing. They spent $10 million on a guy that they ended up cutting in midseason. Because he was just that unproductive. And, Clowney, when he was on the field, was a pretty good player. I'm not sure worth what they paid there either, but, he gets hurt. They don't have him out there at the end of the year. And it was it's a bust. They needed to fix their pass rush, and they weren't able to do it. And it was evident, talking about the defensive struggles. Yeah, they didn't get sacks, but they didn't even get pressure. Like you said, I mean, quarterbacks against the Titans too often just stood there and did what they wanted to do. And you can't do that in the NFL. Any NFL quarterback, if you allow him to do that, it's going to tear you apart. And I think most of their problems defensively, they weren't great at the back end in coverage, but I think it did have to do with the pass rush. And I think they think it had to do with the pass rush. So you get into free agency, and they probably paid too much for Bud Dupree, but if you're going to get a guy who is proven to get sacks in that league, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for it. That's just too much in demand, that position and that specialty. And so you kind of knew going in they were going to have to bid pretty high for somebody, and they did to go get Bud Dupree. And as I'm sure you guys probably have talked about, this NFL offseason has been a lot different in the fact that the salary cap went down for the first time in, I think, 9 years. So you're seeing around the league, a lot of teams are having to part ways with guys that they probably wouldn't want to without if the cap had increased as it normally would have. The Titans had to do that too. There were a couple of cuts along the way that I think really hurt, and you had to do that to be able to get the capital to go make a signing like Bud Dupree. And I think the question is, we've talked about how good the offense is. Well, they didn't re-sign Corey Davis, the second wide receiver who ended up with the Jets. They didn't re-sign Jonnu Smith, the tight end, who I think was an underrated part of what they did offensively for last couple of years. He ends up making big money with the Patriots. And so I think the question is, how much were they willing to sacrifice offensively to address their needs on defense? And I think losing those guys, in addition to signing Bud Dupree, kind of answered that question. They have a couple other additions, though. I think Danico Autry was an underrated signing as an interior defensive lineman. I think he's the kind of guy who can generate more of an interior pass rush than what they had. I mean, I don't think it's just on the edge. I think they needed that guy in the middle to create more of a push, and I think he's that guy, and they took him from the Indianapolis Colts, their top rival in the division. So I really like that signing. And, at cornerback, they essentially traded Malcolm Butler for Janoris Jenkins from the Saints. And in both cases, Butler and Jenkins were cap casualties for both teams. and they end up going to new teams on reduced deals. And that's just kind of what's happening in the NFL right now with a lot of these veteran players.
Gentry, I have a quick question for you. We've obviously talked about the free agency and trying to rebuild that defense a little bit and fill in some holes from last season. Obviously, the other big way for teams to do it is the draft. That's coming up really quickly on us. You guys are picking kind of on the lower end of the draft in the second half. Is there anybody you have your eye on that you would hope that the Titans would go after? Are you hoping maybe they supplement some of those offensive guys that they lost to keep that offense as potent as they can, or go defensive and try and really shore up what you saw as the biggest weakness of the season?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think before adding Bud Dupree in free agency, I think most people would have said edge rusher, got to be edge rusher. And the way the first round is going to fall with the Titans picking 22nd, there's a lot. The edge rusher class this year isn't very top heavy, but you've got a lot of guys in that late first, early second round kind of range. So I think at 22, they're going to have their pick of quite a few guys that could help them at edge rusher. They may do that. But the other needs I think that are most pressing would be cornerback and wide receiver. I think in both cases, it is top heavy. I think you've got a few guys that probably are going to go before 22, and then there's a little bit of a gap. So you got to ask yourself, if you go that route, do you reach on somebody you really like? Do you trade down? What do you do for that? Or do you try to make a move and go up? If it was me, what I'd like to see him do, I'd like to see him trade up and get a difference maker. I think a guy like Devontae Smith from Alabama, the Heisman Trophy winner, there's a lot of questions about his size in the NFL. I think from what I've heard, I think Jalen Waddle gets picked ahead of him, his teammate at Alabama, assuming he's healthy. So I think you can start seeing Devontae, if he starts falling 11, 12, 13 into the teens, I think that's a great move for the Titans to jump up and get that guy. That second wide receiver spot for the Titans is a gold mine for whoever goes into that position. And I think Corey Davis proved it last year, because defenses have got to, number one, they've got to worry about Derrick Henry, but they've also got to worry about A.J. Brown on the other side. So if you're that second wide receiver in the Titans offense, you're seeing single coverage all day. And Devontae Smith proved at Alabama this last season, you can't cover him. I mean, really, there was no college corner that was able to cover that guy in single coverage. You put him in that kind of situation, and I think the Titans offense looks pretty scary.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think I agree with you on Devontae Smith as well. I wouldn't be so worried about his size, specifically because of the way the Titans play offense. And on that play action pass, he's going to be much more out in the open, kind of break open the top of the defense and not have to worry so much about slants across the middle or getting like bashed around, I think. So I think that'd be a really nice pick for them. Obviously, with his talent level, he'd be a nice pick for any team, I guess.
Agreed. And I think with the size, I mean, a lot of the Titans people, they valued Corey Davis so much because he was a good run blocker. It was kind of an underrated part of his game and what they like to do. If you saw a lot of these runs Derrick Henry made down the field, you would often see Corey Davis and some of the other receivers at times who were making these blocks down the field. And they're going to have to find guys that can do that. And they did sign Josh Reynolds, who was a kind of a third, fourth guy for the Rams the last few years. Pretty cheap deal, kind of a prove it deal for Josh 1 year. To me, that was a good addition. I think that's the guy who probably did pretty well with the Rams behind some other big name guys who's kind of ready for that, to take that next step. And I think one of the reasons that the Titans beat out the Kansas City Chiefs for him, and you think a guy like Reynolds, well, of course he'd want to go to Kansas City and play with Mahomes, but I think the Titans won out there because of what I was talking about, that second wide receiver spot, whoever is in that role is going to probably put up big numbers. I think that's what helped Corey Davis. And I think that helped him get Josh Reynolds. The question is, I don't really think the Titans are going to draft a receiver in the first round. I think they believe there'll be some guys available later. I still think edge rusher, unless a cornerback falls to them they didn't expect.
I think it's easy enough to have a wide receiver when if he misses the block, Derrick Henry just throws the cornerback into the stands anyway. I don't think he's too worried about making his block.
Tell you this, I've covered a lot of running backs in my career, and there's nobody else I've ever seen that when he gets through the first level, there is a buzz in the press box, in the stadium. You just there's that anticipation that once he's through that first wave, a DB is not tackling him by himself. And he really could go at a moment's notice. I mean, the as big as he is and as fast as he is something special.
Yeah, for a man of his size, to see him break that first initial tackle, he is almost like 50% of the time he's making it all the way. Like it just almost seems like that in your head that he's going to make it like all the way, at least 50% of the time. Gentry, I just have one question as well. So you could say I'm not a fan of Tannehill. Do you think he has sustained success now after losing, say, Jonnu Smith, Corey Davis, depending on if they can replace Corey Davis, and also losing your offensive coordinator? I think you replaced him with the tight ends coach, Todd Downing.
I was going to say that the big one to me on that is Arthur Smith is losing the offensive coordinator, because I think he was a huge part of their success offensively. Arthur did a great job the last couple of years. He completely deserved the job in Atlanta. That was a great hire by the Falcons. They're going to miss Arthur. I don't care what they did to replace him. I think they went for continuity by bringing in a guy who was already on the staff. I know Todd Downing has been a coordinator before. He was for a year with the Raiders. It didn't go very well. So I think they're kind of banking on he's learned since then, and he's kind of more prepared to step into this role. Plus, he's got a better offense now than he had then in Oakland. And I think, they built so much off the play action, putting 2-3 tight ends out there at a time. That created matchup problems for defense. So, yeah, not having Jonnu Smith it could limit them quite a bit when it comes to that. They bringing back some guys like Jeff Swaim, Anthony Firkser. These guys are good tight ends, but they're not Jonnu Smith. They can't hurt you down the field the way Jonnu Smith could, and it kind of limits what you want to do offensively. So it'll be interesting to see. I think Tannehill has been a good fit in Tennessee because he knows what he's doing out there. He makes checks. He knows what plays to put him in. And look, guys, a lot of quarterbacks would benefit from having a running back like Derrick Henry, because it changes everything the defense does. That they have to gear up to stop him. And most times they try and they still can't. And I think with the play action and what the Titans have been able to build off that, has had a lot to do with Tannehill's accuracy, the decisions he makes. I mean, he's a veteran back there. I do think Tannehill's done an underrated job in Tennessee. I think he's one of the top 10, top 12 quarterbacks in the league. I don't think he gets credit for how good he's been. And I think a lot of that has to do with what happened to him in Miami. And a lot of people's minds were kind of already made up, but also the fact that the Titans don't get the media attention as a lot of other teams do. They don't play a lot on Monday night, Sunday night, and some of these marquee games that a lot of the other teams do. The guys on the team are aware of that, by the way. They use that as motivation, and they talk about it all the time. And we always play at noon on Sunday. And it's true. They do. And I just think Tannehill doesn't get a lot of it. He didn't make the Pro Bowl this last year, and there was a lot of talk around here about that. A lot of people were upset about that and said, he really deserved it if you looked at the numbers. And, guys, they don't win 11 games without Tannehill last year, not even close. And, he has been – to go from Marcus Mariota to him, if you look at the Titans record from the time they made that switch, they've been a completely different franchise. And, Derrick Henry deserves a lot of the credit for that, but Ryan Tannehill does too.
Yeah, especially I think it was Deshaun Watson that took his place. So a 5-win Deshaun Watson took the place of an 11-win Ryan Tannehill in the Pro Bowl last year, which, it just doesn't make sense sometimes. But going back to the tight end situation and just looking at the draft prospects, there's a few there, maybe third, fourth round that you could go after. I'm looking at the likes of maybe, a Tommy Tremble, or there's a Hunter Long.
That's the guy I would have said. The guy from Notre Dame, Tremble. Yeah, that one makes a lot of sense to me. Big physical guy. He's got some ability. If I had to say one, I'd say him. And Hunter Long, I wouldn't discount that either, because Mike Vrabel's son played for Boston College, so he's watched every game he's played.
Well, there we go. I think it's confirmed now. Hunter Long to the Titans in the 2021 draft. It's all confirmed.
All I know is if you get a tight end, go Iowa. They seem to always have tight ends up there.
Very true.
So just looking at the rest of free agent, like you were mentioned, that the cornerback is definitely a position of need, and you've lost Malcolm Butler. And I want to get your opinion on the loss of Adoree Jackson, because he was a player that they didn't take the 5th-year option on. They released him when they probably could have tagged him, and they probably would have had to pay less than the Giants now are paying. It seems a bit of a strange move to get rid of him.
I agree. That one surprised me. Very little of what the Titans have done this offseason truly surprised me, and I expected they'd probably have to cut Malcolm Butler when you looked at the salary. But when you look at it, Butler and Adoree both cost him about $10 million against the cap. So you're looking at it and you're saying they're going to pick one of the two. You never thought they'd drop both of them. And that decision was made alongside Dennis Kelly, the right tackle. And both of those moves to release those players, that was the first time where you're kind of like, okay, what are you doing? Because I was surprised with Adoree. I think he's a good young player who was hurt most of last season. And so I think there was some recency bias with Butler because he was coming off a good year. But to me, it was pretty obvious that Adoree was the more valuable player of the two because he's a lot younger. He's fast. He's so much of what you want in today's NFL when he's out there. That said, the production was never quite enough to justify that kind of salary. I will say that. Now, maybe he could reach that. There was still some upside there. It's interesting to me that they drop Adoree and he goes to the Giants and he's making more there than he would have with the Titans. And somebody messed that up. I don't, either the Titans or the Giants, one of them. And so that you don't normally see that. And so I think there was, some differing opinions really on what to expect from Adoree because there's a lot of talent there. He just hasn't quite lived up to it yet. Still a younger player, but look, guys, they're starting from scratch a little bit on defense. I mean, they cleaned house, and it's interesting that they cleaned house with the personnel on the field, but not the coaching staff. Last year, a big part of this last year was Dean Pease retired after the AFC Championship game. Longtime coordinator. He'd been there in Vrabel's first 2 seasons. Vrabel doesn't hire a coordinator to replace him. He takes Shane Bowen, the outside linebackers coach, and basically makes him the de facto guy, but he's not calling him the coordinator. We're getting bits and pieces throughout the year, like, well, who's calling plays? I guess, I guess Shane Bowen is. Well, is Vrabel doing it now? And it was bizarrely complicated from afar to see what they were doing defensively, and I never really understood it. So it would have made sense, I think, going into this offseason to really go get a coordinator and say, okay, let's try some new things. Let's bring in some fresh eyes to kind of see what we were doing wrong and put that together. Didn't do that. He just took Shane Bowen and made him the full-time coordinator. He gave him the title. And a lot of fans didn't like that. That was not a very popular decision. When you're coming off a year like what the Titans just had defensively, and you don't make hardly any changes to the coaching staff, but you overhaul the players, you're sending a pretty clear message to everyone that we don't think it was the coaching. We think it was the players. And, the players themselves may not like that. But we'll see. If you're going to take that kind of stance, you need to make it work because you're not going to be able to come back and say it again next year.
Yeah, for sure. And just looking at the rest of the division, you've got the Jaguars now, Urban Meyer probably looking at Trevor Lawrence. The Colts have gotten Frank Reich back together with Carson Wentz. We don't know what the hell is going on in Houston with the Texans, but they are signing a lot of players and trying to make it a journeyman team, you could probably call it. And we're probably Tyrod Taylor under center next year, providing you don't make any other sort of moves. But are you still expecting another division win and a home playoff next year?
I think it's the pretty clearly 2 teams in the Titans and the Colts. I think the Colts with Carson Wentz is interesting. I'm curious, as like everyone else, to see how that goes. I've kind of always thought pretty highly of Carson Wentz. I know it got away from him a little the last couple of years here in Philly, but I think he's a good player as long as he's able to recapture some of his confidence. I think what happened to him in Philadelphia had to do with the lack of protection he had there. Sometimes you see this where quarterbacks take enough hits and it affects them. It affects how they're able to play. If he's going into Indy where they have a fantastic offensive line. They've got some guys around him. Indianapolis has a good team. They have a lot of talent. And I think if he's right, they have the ability to win the division ahead of the Titans. If he's not, then yeah, I think the Titans have enough to be the best team in a division where 2 of the teams are just kind of in the wilderness right now and you don't know what to expect.
Cool. And finally, one of the last questions before we let you go. the NFL announced that officially that the 17th game is happening from the 2021 season. The way things are working out, it looks like the Titans are going to be playing the Saints at home, which is going to be interesting to see what their quarterback situation is going to be like by the time this game comes around. Are you in favor of the 17th game?
No, but only because I'm a stats nerd, and I hate the fact that now every record has to have an asterisk by it because everybody's going to have an extra game. I hate that. I do. I've thought that the whole time. And, but I think from the standpoint of what it does to next year's schedule, it actually was a good thing for the Titans, because what happens is they add the Saints because you have the number one team from the AFC South against the number one team from the NFC South. So the number two team from the AFC South, the Colts, they get to add Tampa, who is the number two team. So you get the Super Bowl champs now on the Colts schedule. So I think that extra game is probably a good thing for the Titans, because who would you rather play between the two, the Saints without Drew Brees or the Bucs, returning pretty much everybody from what they had last year. So it's a tough game, with the Saints, but I think the Saints are one of those teams that you kind of go into next season with no real idea what to expect. They were hit about as hard as anyone by the whole salary cap situation. I mean, they really had to drop a bunch of guys, and they really didn't add much to replace them. So they're worse than they were. They had no choice but to be. And, and obviously losing Drew Brees, well, what are you going to, is it going to be Jameis Winston, or is it going to make Taysom Hill the quarterback? I mean, there's the chance there that they're not very good. And you look at Tampa, and yeah, they're probably going to be pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And before we let you go, where can listeners find your articles and your socials?
Yeah, you can go to Tennessean.com. It's, I cover the Titans. I cover if you like hockey, I cover the Nashville Predators. I'm headed there to a game tonight. We just talking some other football. We just added an MLS team last season, Nashville, that played a lot better than was expected. Actually, they had a pretty good season as an expansion team. So a lot going on in Nashville, and you can follow everything we're doing there. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Gentry_Estes.
Perfect. I just saw in the hockey thing, actually, because I'm a Seahawks fan, and I'm really looking forward to actually seeing the Kraken now take part from next season. It'll probably get me into watching ice hockey now regularly. I'm looking forward to it.
Now you wonder, Seattle's wanted an NBA team back for so long. I guess they'll be happy with an NHL team's fun. The team in Nashville, people don't realize, you get in the southern part of the United States, nobody grew up with hockey, but everybody loves it. I mean, even before COVID, they were selling out every game. And, I think the Predators have a pretty big following. Yeah,
and it was actually the Tampa Bay Lightning that won it last year as well. So another team from the South that won too. So
that's right. That storied rivalry between Tampa Bay and Dallas in the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, that's it. I have a friend who's a Calgary fan, and he's incensed because, it seems as though the balance of power is tipping from the Canadian teams over to the American sides here on the ice hockey, where for years it was the other way around, for sure.
Well, you look at these hockey players, where would you want to live? Would you rather go live in Tampa, or would you want to live in Calgary?
I just think ice hockey in a swamp is the best thing I can ever.
I know. Well, that's the thing. When it comes to football too, is like location is a big thing. You don't want to be like all the way up north, like in Green Bay, where it snows 360
Buffalo
days.
better pay me a lot of money to go catch footballs up there. I tell you that.
Well, everyone thought J.J. Watt was going to go to the Packers because he's from Wisconsin. No, no, he went to Arizona. He knew better.
The retirement home.
Well, that's it. That's why AJ Green went there too. Now he's getting out of Cincinnati. He's getting out of that cold. He's going to get that warm weather climate.
The older players, it helps their joints. You see.
See, that's it. Tom Brady set the trend there now with it. He set the trend with QBs wanting more say now in their teams, and now he's also having say with the veteran players wanting to go to warm weather climates for their last few years of playing ball. So There we go. But listen, Gentry, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate taking the time out to speak to us about Titans and now a bit about NHL too. We hope to speak to you again maybe closer to the season, if not during the year.
Yeah, you bet. Take care, guys.